Welcome to the Flakemiri podcast, or Flakemiri show, or a show about Flakemiri. I don't know, but either way, it's a show about Gwent and so much more. I am Flake, and I'm joined by Shinmiri. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. Good to be back here for episode 4, A New Rope.
Well, it's okay. That should be A New Hope, but I should have seen that one coming. Either way, the pun was exceptional, Shinmiri. That was pretty good. It is indeed episode 4, A New Rope. And today's episode is actually sponsored by, nobody still. And I mean, still, that's okay because you can, I guess you guys can be rest assured, I suppose, that given the fact that we have no sponsors, that you will not be interrupted by any commercials about, male grooming tools or energy potions or whatever else is popular sponsoring these podcasts.
Yeah. One day, maybe.
Possibly.
One day we may or may not get Dagon. So today's Dagon weather report, Dagon rumor report, still nothing on the horizon. But, I mean, we do have those 12 leader cards that are supposed to be released in December. And Dagon was previously a leader in this game. So, I don't know.
Now you're the one who's planting the seeds. Typically, that's a Flake thing. But, yeah, I mean, okay, full disclosure to everyone out there. Shinmiri and I do have things that we cannot tell you. There are just facts and information that are sometimes given to us ahead of time. I'm not saying all the time. We're not knee deep in the machine that is CDPR learning about all this stuff. But there are sometimes things that we know that we cannot tell you because we will get fired out of a cannon directly into the sun or whatever the NDA explains. But yeah, I mean, there is a fact that there are 12 cards coming, which are they actually confirmed as like quote unquote leader cards?
I mean, I think they said they're going to be using, or a lot of them are going to be using whatever leader card arts were still available from the past. Like, I think like Ethne had a card art that wasn't used yet. What else? Like, I don't know. There's definitely, in the history of Gwent, there's definitely some card arts that were in the game before at one point, and they no longer are. And so that way, if they're able to reuse those assets for new cards, then it saves them a lot of time and money. And some of these are really, really cool card arts that we've seen in the past that no longer exist. It's it would be great to have them back game. Not saying that all of these cards are going to have old art, but I think at least some of them.
Like, well, we've seen it in the past. Like, I think it was like a year ago at the same time, there was that 12 card drop or so that we had the Brewer, you had Francesca, Full Test, things like these, right? I mean, this is just sort of a second wave. And in reality, those were fairly impactful cards. I mean,
they were.
A lot of those were really shaping. I mean, Full Test was pretty important. Brewer was a very build around kind of massive threat in long rounds. Francesca kind of was one that I thought was going to be bigger, badder, nastier, and didn't quite stick around to be bigger, badder, nastier.
Iced was a really impactful one.
Yes, yeah. Iced was and still is a focal point. There are some that are just, they get married to particular leader abilities that just make them great. Like those types of peanut butter jelly style combinations, I feel Iced and Blaze of Glory are forever married together as being just two peas in a pod. Like that is just how you play that leader.
And like Horson Jr., I think was also one of those 12 card drops. But when he was first introduced, it wasn't as strong as it is now. And then it got buffed after seeing no play for a couple months. And then once it got buffed, it's like a staple syndicate.
All this to say is the fact that there are 12 new cards, leader-inspired cards coming around the horizon. Dagon was a leader. Dagon
did have card art.
Correct.
Did have card art.
So that's not like they're good. They're just going to the well for it. It's not like they have to go out and contract new artists to kind of do this, new animations. It exists. It's out there. Still, from what Shinmiri and I can tell you, based on our, appreciation of being gainfully employed, there is no Dagon on the horizon. from what we are allowed to tell you, there is no Dagon on the horizons. Take for that what you will. Yeah. So that is the Dagon rumor report, which we do bring you every week because you're worth it. And I believe that's something that everybody wants to see. And I guess for some, we are the closest thing to insiders that they may have access to. But yeah, not happening. But things did happen several years ago over the course of Gwent. We'd like to bring you a little bit of Gwent history to a degree. This week in Gwent, about a year ago, we did get the Alzur journey, and I liked that journey. I thought that was a pretty sweet journey.
Yeah, me too. It was unique. It was unexpected. Nobody really thought the character like Alzur would get a journey because he's like not really a huge part of the books or the games, but he is definitely a big part of Witcher history and lore. I really liked what they did with it. The characters and the lore they put behind it. The cosmetics were great, of course. And yeah, we got like a wide array of nerfs to artifacts with that patch a year ago.
More than so, like 2018 was actually
2018. Okay.
Yeah, so way back. Mission.
Way back. 3 years ago.
Yeah, and it was kind of known as the dagger through the heart of the artifacts. I don't want to say like the artifact archetype, but I'm trying to think if even was 3 years ago, were there still minimums for units in decks, or was it still kind of you could still sort of float around with this no unit nonsense?
So, Homecoming came out 3 years ago. About 3 years and a few weeks. So this must have been the first patch since after Homecoming. And they nerfed a bunch of like artifacts like Sihil because like it was one of the most annoying and powerful strategies at the same time. No unit Scoia'tael, no unit Skellige, I think was another faction that played it. No unit monsters. A lot of factions were just abusing like the mastercrafted spear, the shield, and then the Sihil.
Well, Sihil actually got what might be one of the most dramatic nerfs in Gwent history. I mean, for instance, if you're kind of trying to equate what a nerf would be in terms of its impact, you have various different degrees of what you can nerf on a card. If a card is a vanilla card, there are really two things you can touch. It's the strength of the card, like the power of the card, or the provision of the card. And if you're adjusting 1 point, typically speaking, adjusting 1 provision point is a bigger nerf than adjusting 1 power point for the most part. A lot of cards along the way when patches come through. We're now at patch 9.5, right? We have so many different patches along the way. I think this patch was something like patch 3 point something or 2 point something or whatever. So, but this one got a 3 provision hike from 12 to 15. That is legitimately saying that we effed up and we had no idea the power level of this card because we missed it by like miles. And
I'm pretty sure I think if my memory serves me correctly, that even after this 3 provision nerf to 15 provisions, it was still seeing play because they didn't actually change fundamentally how it worked. Like it was still cooldown 1 after the 15 provision nerf.
Right.
I think later they had to change it to cooldown 2. But it was like so good that people would still play it at 15 provision.
Which is obscene. It is absolutely obscene. Just as a minor rundown, there were 10 artifacts that were touched. Sihil was essentially the most dramatic, but the second most dramatic, in my opinion, was the fact that the Mastercrafted Spear and the Wyvern Scale Shield went from 5 to 7 provisions. And for those who don't know the impact of these now completely forgettable cards, these were 5 provision artifacts that were essentially worth 1 point a turn. Non-interactable because I don't know if Heatwave was around back then. I could be wrong. I don't know if Heatwave was still like a weather or if it had just kind of not been around, but no one's Heatwaving a 5 provision artifact.
Right.
But these were on the board. It's either boost 1 by turn or boost once per turn by 1 or deal 1 damage by 1 per turn. It was the most... I don't want to say when this came out, I remember Pumpkin was one of them, which is like, I'm just going to play weather and shields and spears, get last say, and then play like a 4-point card. And who cares? It doesn't matter what unit.
You have no points. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. This was quite a dramatic change in terms of how CDPR envisioned the impact of what artifacts were. Not to mention, I think this was also the first blowback from the community of saying artifacts are ridiculous. You guys have to look at this.
Yeah, I think that, that was probably in my mind the biggest misstep when it came to the original Homecoming release was the imbalance of artifacts, and even just like not just imbalance, but like the design of artifacts. And I think since then, it's been 3 years since then, and I think CDPR has gotten much better at designing artifacts, and they've moved away from the type of artifacts that do nothing on deploy and all of their value is stored on their order ability. And they've kind of started leaning more towards artifacts that do a little bit of both. Like some of the value is in its deploy when you play it, and then some smaller value is on its order. We've seen a lot of these new locations being released over the last year or so, right? Like, every faction has a location like from Way of the Witcher, like Heron Kaduk, right? It on deploy, it's an artifact, but it plays a card, a unit, and then order effect, which can be carried over to the next round, does something small, something worth about like 4 points, 2 to 4 points. And then we've got Mushy Truffle, the latest one. It's a little bit bigger, but it's like 6 points on its order ability that can be carried over. And I think as long as the order ability that cannot be interacted with except for Heatwave, as long as that value remains on the lower side, I think it will prevent artifacts from becoming unhealthy like they were in the early release of Homecoming.
Yeah, the unhealthiness, a lot of it also came from the fact I believe there was just there were no minimums in terms of how many units you had to play. So the games it was kind of like this really, it was a worst case scenario in terms of a launch for a game that's trying to reimagine itself from what it was, which was this create fiesta, these like really exploited rules. There was an immense imbalance, and it was kind of figured out down to the numbers of how to play dwarves to their max potential and things to that degree. And then it gets repackaged and rebranded and polished and fired out of a cannon right back at your face. And it's a great game today. It's beautiful, and I absolutely adore it. But at the time, it did have still some growing pains, because part of the rebrand and part of the presentation to the world, because how many people left and said, I'll be back when you guys figure this out, and they come back, and then essentially you're playing against decks where you cannot do anything to your opponent's cards. It is a very, very bad advertisement for the game, and like you said, growing pains for the game and the developers and everybody to say, all right, maybe artifacts need to be gold, and they need to be very, very, I don't want to say circumstantial, but like you said, they are excuse me, they are kind of broken up into like these two pieces. So upon deploy, they're not getting full value, and there is an option to maybe limit the future value of it, or to address it to a degree, because a lot of these locations, like you said, Heron Kaduk or Mushy Truffle, your opponent does typically have an opportunity to disrupt the full value of that card. And I like the way that they've kind of addressed how oppressive artifacts were with the sort of these new waves of locations with sort of these two-tiered, value progression.
Yeah, I think so too. So I think that's one of the most important lessons learned from Homecoming so far, and I think they're doing a pretty good job with artifacts. Artifacts, like, there was at one point even an argument to tie them to some condition of having units either in their row or on the board or adjacent to them. Like, could be lore friendly, as in like you need a unit, a person to like hold the artifact in order to activate it. And that way you can't just have a board full of like 4 or 5 different artifacts and no units to interact with and just pinging like crazy.
Fascinating to me is the fact that Pitfall Trap went from 7 to 8 provisions in that patch, and now it sits at what, 6? Is it 6?
Pitfall Trap?
I think there's 6 or 7 again.
No, I think it should be. I don't even know, 7 or 8. I think it's 8.
Oh, maybe.
But I think they reworked it. Pitfall Trap used to be different. To do something different.
Gosh, it's so crazy how many things have just changed. Anyway, well, that's basically sort of a snapshot of what Gwent was 3 years ago, and again a year ago was the release of the Alzur journey, and here we are now with the Regis journey, which. In terms of value for this, and I've seen a few people put out videos in terms of like, is it worth it? And that's a common theme for videos whenever these new content drops occur, especially the ones that really require a financial investment. I know that Christo puts one out. I've seen some from other content creators, and the consensus seems to be that this journey is pretty damn good bang for your buck if you are. I mean. You, myself, we compare our in-game resources like it's like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. It's this embarrassment of riches. So to us, I get the journey because I like the cosmetics. I like getting the keys. I'm just this weird completionist. But if you are somebody who's new to the game, does this journey not just seem like amazing to you? Like the value in it,
it's crazy value. It's crazy value. Like I don't even know the full gist of it, but I took a peek at the journey 100 levels, and they have like every single evolving card in there.
Yeah.
From every faction. Those are all legendaries. There's like an Oniromancy, I believe.
And a Heatwave.
Heatwave, like amazing cards that can go in every deck. And on top of all the cosmetics, right? So you're not only getting cosmetics, you're also getting cards that very meta, very competitive cards that can help you, leapfrog into a competitive deck.
Like, that's the one thing that really got me, because I have bought into premium passes for other games, for instance, for like Magic, let's say. Mm-hmm. And back when I was playing Magic like 2 hours a day, when I was really ladder hungry and I was really into the game, playing 2 hours competitively a day, I'd probably hammer out maybe, 8 to 10 matches a day, let's say, and I'd progress through it. The cards you get out of it, you get packs, you get this, you get that, but the cards and the alternate art. First of all, you didn't get the cards; you got alternate art for the cards. You get like expanded borders for the cards, so you didn't even get the cards. You had to first open the card in a pack. This is a whole different ballgame because the cards that you get in here are no joke. They are, Usurper, sure, maybe not meta right now, but how long has that card been really good? Ethne, go and make a symbiosis list right now and enjoy your Ethne. Harold with Blaze of Glory or Harold with any kind of warrior build. Totally crucial. And then on top of it, it's like, oh, and by the way, here's the best removal in the game, and here's the best tutor ever printed in any game ever. It's obscene. And if you're new to the game and you're kind of look, first of all, Shimiri and I don't get paid to say this kind of nonsense. We're just very upfront and honest. When we see BS, we call BS, and this is just something where even us who have everything times 1,000, we still bought it and we still are enjoying it. So go get the journey. It's well worth it for sure.
Yeah, you even get like 3 leader avatar skins for the price of 1, because Regis has like the human form, the hybrid half human, half vampire form, and then the full higher vampire.
Is this your favorite skin? Like, out of curiosity, what is your favorite skin?
My favorite skin is Siri, because she's the fastest. I don't care about aesthetics or looks, Flake. I just care about how fast the leader is when I click on them so that I don't end up roping out. Okay? That's my number 1 priority.
Can I just say, I don't think in the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours that we have broadcast together, I don't think I've ever seen you get worked up to that degree. And as soon as it comes down to the timing and, but you know what's funny about that entire exchange, Shinmiri, is the fact that you have 90 seconds or so, or 60 seconds leading up to that point, and you choose to cram like an entire turn's worth of action within like 0.36 seconds at the end of a turn.
Yeah, so, I'm very precise. I know how much, like, for the most part, I know how much time I need to execute my turn. And every millisecond counts. So Siri is the fastest as far as I know. So I'm gonna keep using it.
Well, that's awesome. I could tell the color of the M&Ms with my eyes closed when I eat them. That's my skill.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess, you know what, like the way that we structure these podcasts, we kind of have like a mini script. I don't want to say script, but like a guideline of how we sort of structure the intro and such. And that was actually all within the intro section. And the main topic that we actually want to talk about today, Shinmiri, I got a nice message from a big fan of the show, Geronimo, who was very much wanted us to just kind of slowly dig into a topic that has bothered them, at least to a degree, and then they wanted us to just discuss it a little bit. And basically it was the fact that I will sort of boil it down, because it was a lot of text that was sent at me, and it was all relevant, but I will boil it down for the sake of the show. But basically the question is, are archetypes kind of getting to be a little bit overpowered to a degree? Specifically, the example that Geronimo offered was assimilate. And what he sort of leans on is the fact that a lot of engine pieces in engine style decks, for instance, something like Thrive or whatever, you have the engine set up, and usually you're getting maybe one trigger off of a deploy. Whereas assimilate, something like Arto onto something else, onto something else, onto something else, will trigger this mass amount of several, like 3 or 4 in a potential turn. And this might just be a little over the top, and perhaps this is something that is beyond what CDPR had envisioned for that faction to be. And I guess the question is, with that in mind, the focus being on assimilate, are some of the archetypes perhaps getting a little bit too overpowered? And, maybe, and this is my add-on, is like maybe we're just not going to see further help for some of these archetypes.
Yeah, I think there's not that many archetypes that would fall under the term overpowered, in my opinion, especially because like most strong archetypes can be power crept on, I suppose. Whereas assimilate has this unique property where it's really difficult to power creep on assimilate, because if other factions and other decks and other archetypes get stronger cards, assimilate just gets to play them, right? Assimilate's whole identity is like, I'm playing your cards, but with extra points, because I get to play, a Terra Nova on top of your golds, and a Brothens on top of your bronzes, and an Arturius on top of your bronzes. And like you said, like all these assimilate engines, they're not limited at 1 point per turn, where a lot of other traditional engines are limited at 1, maybe 2 points a turn. Assimilate engines, you can, if you have enough setup with them, with like Ku, with Terra Nova, you can get like 3, 4, 5 points a turn. Just depending on how many, cards that chain into other cards, that create other cards, that spawn and play other cards there are.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what he's kind of leaning on as well, is the fact that this may have been a situation where it could have potentially been an oversight, but the fact remains is that assimilate is not the top dog. It is amongst the better decks that are out there, and I think that over the past little while it has been. But prior to that, assimilate was still around. Brothens was still around. I think it was Terra Nova perhaps that kind of really just sort of supercharged it a little bit. But we have seen in the past with a lot of those pieces that were there, where Masquerade Ball was still the way to lean when it comes to Nilfgaard. There was be it Hyperthin had its day in the sun, as well as Cloggers had its day in the sun. Masquerade Ball, obviously, some type of enslaved tactics style control list perhaps was out there as well. I think that for assimilate, the fact that you're getting multiple triggers off of at the same time is just the fact that, like you said, just the nature of the cards and the nature of the beast in itself is that you are playing a card that plays another card, and whatever your opponent has is, assimilate needs to balance itself against all factions and not only its own, and that can be really difficult to do, because for the most part, monsters only needs to worry about monsters and neutral cards, to consider how over the top it could potentially be. Whereas if you're trying to balance assimilate, well, you're balancing it against all 6 factions plus neutrals, and that is incredibly difficult to do. So I would suspect that assimilate, after the printing of Arto Terra Nova, we've probably seen the last major piece of assimilate for a while. We'll probably see cards have an assimilate tag on it. Those cards that are like, okay, this is good on its own. We don't want to boost the power on it, and we don't want to lower the provision on it. Do we slap armor on it, or maybe we just throw in something like assimilate? Like something weird just to add on to it.
Now, back in the day, maybe like a year ago, I would have said that the keyword assimilate on a card wasn't worth that many points. But now, I think a keyword assimilate can be worth like 10 points, maybe even more, probably more in a long round, probably like 15 points in a long round. And part of it is like, it's a bunch of different things coming together that made assimilate super good. Like Terra Nova is one of them. I think Mage Torture is a big part. Mage Torture got buffed from 4 to 5 strength. And that made it a lot harder to remove.
With Veil on top of it, too.
Yeah, with Veil on top of it. And I think another big thing, Lydia is another one that just came recently with Harvest of Sorrow, became really good. But cards like Lydia and newer cards that just got, as time goes on, the newer cards in Gwent become more complex. And a lot of the times, these more complex cards, they involve, mechanics that have spawning and playing other cards, like Gerhardt, for example. Gerhardt is a really powerful card on its own, a great copy target for Assimilate, and it plays another card, like the spell that it spawns. So not only Gerhardt procs the Assimilate, but then the spell that it spawns also procs all of your Assimilates. And if you're playing something like a Teleport or a Practice Makes Perfect, that's going to play another card. So that's like 3 in 1, right? Gerhardt is potentially 3 Assimilate procs in 1, and he's also just really good standalone value. You've got like Sorceress of Doblathana that can get you, for example, extra Assimilate procs from like creating a Bountiful Harvest. Same thing with Elven Seer. With Fakusha. Fakusha gives you multiple procs as well. Lydia, steal or copy or create their bronze special card, which could, be a rune word that plays another card. Like, there's just so many possibilities now within each faction to activate multiple assimilate procs in one card.
And it's not the only faction that can do that. I mean, like multiple triggers in a turn. I think it's obviously the one that does it the best, but there are, for instance, if we're talking about something like Thrive can be triggered multiple times in a turn if you do something like Oberon into another card that, it's just the fact that Assimilate does it the best because that is what it's meant to do. That is in its DNA, is to create, out of thin air, these other units and whatnot, steal from you, generate value out of thin air to then supplement to sort of synergize with the various amounts of assimilate units you have on the board, and then you kind of go on this massive train. It's just that it does it the best, but it's meant to do it the best. Much like monster cards are meant to have the most amount of, potential swarm capability, or just the tallest, fattest, beefiest boys on the board in that regard. And I guess to answer your question to a degree, Geronimo, is, are they getting too overpowered? I don't think that it's getting too overpowered in over the top of anything else, because if that were the case, by now I think it would just be hands down all over the ladder, but that's not what I'm seeing. While I'm playing, I'm running into just as many Scoia'tael symbiosis lists as I am warrior lists, as I am assimilate lists, as I am siege/mage lists. Like they are out there. One thing I'm not running into, obviously, is Syndicate. That's just the one thing I'm definitely not running into. But I don't think it's overpowered. I don't think that it needs to be revisited. What I think that it needs to happen is that I think it needs to just be on CDPR's radar of saying, like you said, Shinmiri, it gets buffed when other factions get buffed, because you're increasing the options for your opponent to steal better cards to a degree.
I think they're aware that it's one of the stronger archetypes, and that's why we saw that one provision nerf to coup de grace, right? And coup de grace is a pretty key part of any assimilate deck, whether you're playing on Joachim or playing it on a spied unit from your opponent's side of the board, or just getting the death blow to copy their unit. Coup de grace got a nerf, and I think they should probably stop printing cards that help assimilate, and look at other archetypes. Like, for example, like soldiers. They recently buffed soldiers a little bit with the balance patch, right? And this kind of leads into our other question, is that what archetypes do you think need some more love right now or that need to be brought back? Nilfgaard soldiers, I think, isn't quite up to par yet, so they could see a little bit of love. Have any other archetypes on your mind?
Well, you know what just crossed my mind, actually? I don't mean to rewind this back, but I just thought of a little interaction that I thought it should make sense, but it doesn't occur. When you play Coup de Grace and it comes back as an echo card in your hand, if you have an assimilate card on the board, when you play Coup de Grace, should you not get an assimilate trigger off of the fact that you're playing a created card off of Echo?
Echo doesn't create a new card. It's the exact same card that was in your starting deck that moves from the graveyard back into the top of your deck. It just gains a Doom.
For some reason, I envisioned it as it just creates a doomed copy of itself.
But it's the same card. Otherwise, Assimilate would be even better.
Even more crazy, right? Yeah, just drop in with something and suddenly it's, okay, here my Coup de Grace turn already starts with an entire trigger of Assimilate off the entire board. Okay, archetypes that need love. I mean, you mentioned soldiers. I will definitely double down on that. Soldiers did get love this patch, last patch, multiple patches. How many times are soldiers getting extra love, be it by buffing of the, like, for instance, the Redanian Knight got buffed, the Tortoise got buffed, you know, a little while ago. It just doesn't seem like, because what soldiers wants to do is what other factions do, but better. You want to play something that plays big bodies on the board and really drop some points on the board. Well, Monsters does that better than you, soldiers. Oh, you want to play something like directed damage and a little bit of pew pew here and there. Maybe you're dropping some, you know, the crossbowmen, or you're dropping the Impera Enforcers or something like that with the spies. All right, well, there are other factions that do directed damage and damage your opponents better than you do. You know, do you want to do Swarm? Monsters already does that better than you. It kind of is in this weird state where players will play it and then probably soon realize that, you know what, there are better Nilfgaard decks out there, but if I'm so married to the fact that I want to play this style of play, I should probably play this because I'll see more success with it. I should probably play Monsters if I want to play big boys and big beefy stuff.
I agree with what you're saying, but I don't think it has to be like I envision soldiers as more of a proactive strategy, maybe like a combo strategy with the Remedy and the Vrygef and Germain giving you a bunch of ones for your slave infantry, right? And Illusionist, the new Illusionist, works really well with slave infantry as well before you get the bonded. And so I think maybe just needs a little bit of number tweaks here and there. And if you can get it to the point where it does compete in points with some of these other proactive strategies or combo strategies, then you're no longer saying that, oh, Monsters just does this better. Then you've got some flavor, right?
Yeah, you're not wrong there, and not to mention you're getting those points under a protective umbrella of armor, right? Like if you're pairing it up properly with the right leader ability or whatnot, you should be feeling a little bit better when you're going up against these other archetypes that might want to direct damage here or there. Suddenly, you know, your opponent's Nature's Rebuke, let's say, is not quite as potent when your 4 strength unit is sitting under 2 points of armor. That Rebuke ain't going to touch you. What would have probably, you know, ended the day for a Banard student, let's say, is that, you know, you'll be able to actually protect that spy or that Impera Enforcer, protect it with like an an emissary, boost it back up, plus get the extra charge and do that thing. It just seems like it's just kind of lacking. It's I don't want to say it's like jack of all trades, master of none, because it's not even a jack of all trades, because it has its hand in too many cookie jars. It can swarm, but not swarm good enough. It can drop bombs, but they're not big enough. It could combo, but not big enough. It could control, but not good enough. You know? Yeah,
I agree. I think another archetype that needs some love right now is vampires. Vampires was meta at one time, but they've gotten power creeps for a long time. They did try to buff the archetype, introducing new cards like Unseen Elder as well as Dettlaff. Those 2 cards were with the 12 leader cards at the beginning of this year, and but they're not quite there yet, right? Vampires still don't see any play, but I think, you know, they're not too far away. They need some sort of mechanic, I would say I would love to see vampires get some sort of mechanic where either they can bleed through Veil, or a way to like speed up their bleeding. I mean, Unseen Elder does that, but like maybe like some sort of Ryogon type of card for bleeding mechanic could be
Imagine
useful.
a card that said, well, that's it. It's like, what if there was a card that says turn all bleeding into damage?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that would be like, the thing about it is that eventually you get to a point where you're just bleeding your opponent so much and you just run out of time, because if there's 3 turns left in the turn and something is bleeding 1,000, you're getting 3 points of damage. Like, you get it?
Exactly.
It's just not going to work out. So it takes a lot of finesse in order for vampires to kind of be, I don't want to say viable, because they were viable for a while. There was a time about a year and a half ago, perhaps, where, whenever Unseen Elder came out and that card kind of wheeled in, that in conjunction with Caranthir onto that card, onto Unseen Elder, you could protect it with you protected it with a defender, let's say. You had Oriana going off. You had all kinds of different engine pieces. You can put a Necrorat in the front row, and if it was unanswered, it was very, very oppressive. But it just kind of got to a point where if your opponent didn't have enough bodies for bleeding to be spread around, if Veil was around, then again, if all they're presenting for you is just 2 or 3 stacks of points, the clock was your enemy, because you can put 20 bleeding on each of those. If you have 20 bleeding to go around, but only 3 turns to pop, eventually you're going to run out of bodies to transform those into points. What needed to maybe be out there is some kind of unit, or a gold unit or something like that exists, that says bleeding occurs on the start of the turn as well as the end of the turn. Something weird that would double up on that. So
I mean, Unseen Elder does that.
Unseen Elder does. Or something along the lines of like just flat out jam your opponent's. Even what if there was even a bronze card that said transform bleeding into damage? You could run 2 copies.
Yeah, something like that, or even a sort of card that traded, that had extra value, but offset it by spawning a unit on your opponent's side of the board that had a certain decent amount of power that you could then bleed. So it gives you a bleeding target, right? Like if you say like a competitive 5 provision card is worth 8 points, you could have, a 13-point card for 5 provisions that spawned a 5 on your opponent's side of the board. So it's still 8 points, right?
Yeah.
It's still 8 points, but it gives you a body to bleed. Because part of the problem is not having enough bodies.
Oh, man.
And then you can then get rid of that body through the bleeding, keep your 13 points, right?
Ghouls would love that card all day long.
Yeah, ghouls would absolutely love that card. That's the other thing. All the good vampire cards that you talked about, Unseen Elder, Dettlaff, Oriana, Necrorat, they all want to be played early. They all need a long round to get good value. And their vampire archetype needs a finisher type card that you're happy to play late, that you're okay if it's being played in a short round. Vampires have no short round. Previously, when they were meta, they kind of shored up their short round and finisher with Ozrel. I think they played like Yagurn Ozrel. Maybe they even played like the 10 for 10 living armor, I think, at one point.
Or some type of 10-point body. Armor. I mean, even if it was Goliath, like you said, basically the strategy for monsters, or at least for any non-top tier monster list, was always, we need points and we need to, like you said, shore up a short round. And the way to do that has always been Fat Boy Ozrel,
Yep.
So you can play it in a round 1 to try to secure it that way, and you can possibly recur it. If you lose that round, you could survive a bleed with your bleeding cards, your Necrorat, your Unseen Elder, your Oriana, and then if push comes to shove, you can jam the Ozrel to actually have a fighting chance. But it just kind of feels bad, like you said, where you're always pigeonholed into these situations where I mean, put it this way: if Gwent was a 1 round 20 turn card game, vampires would feel like untouchable. Like it feels like you just never lose.
Yeah, it certainly would be a lot better if it was a 1 round 20 card game, 20 round game. But that's just a completely different game. And I love the fact that Gwent is best of 3 rounds, and the whole, make your opponent overkill you in the round that you lose. That's a really good strategy. I love it.
But you see the problem with like a 13.5 provision bronze card, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be 13 base power.
But I like it. Even if it was something like a 9 for 5 that gave your opponent a 2-body, that's still decent enough because a lot of these cards are depositing 2 points of bleed, let's say. And the problem I find also is that the payoff on your side of the board to generate points off of bleed is not good enough. Giving giving vitality to some of your own units is not good enough. What it needs almost is like it just, it's weird. Like it's any time that you need to rely on your opponent to provide opportunity for you to win a round is never going to be viable outside of a meta specific environment. Like if your objective is to just scratch and claw at your opponent's point total through bleeding their units and whatnot, well, what are you doing on your side is what it is. That's why decks that can be self-sufficient, Symbiosis, for example, at the very least, if you're playing crappy cards, Symbiosis is at least dropping some bodies on the board for you to actually kind of soak up a little bit of point value while your opponent might not present opportunity for you to do anything to them. And that's why I think Vampires is never going to necessarily be this almighty presence for too long, because it is so dependent on your opponent's just kind of gifting you units to bleed. And with how many Veil units are out there right now and such, like it gets nasty. It gets really, really nasty. Mm-hmm. And I wish it was good. It was good for a while. I don't think it was ever like tier 1 or anything like that, like top of the heap. But it was a dangerous deck for a while. It did have this little bubble where people played it and people were kind of afraid of it.
Yeah, I think it could get back there. I think it wouldn't. I think if it gets like a good finisher or two, I think it could get back.
I think so too. Real quick over here, let's just wrap this up with another little piece here before we hit the mailbag, Shinmiri. What do you think? What would you like to see come back? I know that in previous episodes we kind of mentioned how cool it would be to see like a revamped reveal style thing. But for you, what's something that you would like to see come back? It could even be like a rule set. Don't say 3 rows, because I will catapult you, into a neighboring city. But you know what I mean.
Are you just talking like archetypes, or are you talking about mechanics?
Well, we can talk about archetypes. Let's focus on archetypes for now, because that we've been kind of talking about archetypes.
They're not really coming back because they never were. But Pirates and Ships Skellige, like they need some love. They have been a struggling archetype for too long, and they never got their time in the spotlight. I think that could be a good one to focus on for Skellige.
I was thinking about how back in the day, like, do you remember like old school like Necker Swarm, right? Where you'd play the Necker Warrior to basically drop 2 Neckers at the bottom of your deck, and the Death Wish effect on those Neckers was whenever a Necker died, you pull one out of the deck and put it on. Whatever the top one was in your deck, you put it out there, and every time a Necker died, how did the Neckers grow? Was it every
From
time
consuming?
Consuming
stuff.
Yeah, so every time you had a consume trigger, the Neckers on the board and in your deck would grow by 1. So, and then you would just be cloning them. So they would just be this never-ending clone army of Neckers that would come through. And then I was thinking about how it would be cool to bring that back. And then I remembered that this is basically just V. It is V in a bronze card. And what I think that people need to understand is that there are sometimes good things that aren't back, and the nostalgia factor is not enough for me to say that is a good thing, because we did get it back. We did get old school Necker Swarm back. It just is now packaged in a neat little V bow with a box with a bow on it that comes back multiple times, and that was one hell of a reminder of why certain things should not come back. But in terms of old school archetypes that I would like to see come back, I mean, man, I wish Frost, very heavily ingrained Frost related stuff was a thing. Fog as well, but maybe we'll see that coming soon. No spoilers. I don't know. There you go. It's bless you, my friend. Yeah. Ultimately, I guess Pirates and Ships was another cool one. The other thing was just playing out of like, there were graveyard specific decks like remember the old school Queensguard lists where you play one, they all fire back, and you'd basically spend the entire game kind of beefing up this 3-pack of Queensguards. And
we have that. It's called Crow Messenger.
It's called what?
Crow Messenger. Crow Messenger, then you like Operator Crow Messenger, you muzzle the one from your opponent's side of the deck, you Megascope Crow Messengers, and then you play like a 28 for 5 in rounds 2, and then you play another 28 for 5 in round 3.
So the more we go into this conversation, the more I realize that I'm just glad that certain things were just left into 2017 and 2016, and that I'm kind of just happy with the way that the game state is at right now. That's just me. I'm actually quite enjoying the meta right now. I'm playing every day. I'm enjoying it. I'm trying different things, and I don't feel like I have in previous metas where you're just constantly running headfirst and knocking your head into the same kind of deck every single time. I don't know if your experience has been the same. You play a lot more than I do. I play a couple hours a day. You kind of you hammer out a series of games, man, and like you do it all. Before we hit the mailbag, last question is, what is your just impression of the meta right now?
I like it. Yeah, I think there's always room for improvement. I'd always like to see more archetypes be viable competitively. In terms of, like, when I say competitive, I feel like, I want to see more decks being able to get to the 2550, 2600 level of faction on pro rank. And yeah, I think we're in a decent spot right now, but I think we could get some more archetype variety, and that's what the devs are always working when it comes to balance changes, releasing new cards. I think that's the end goal, is to have a larger variety of archetype per faction, and then good balance between factions as well as with itself.
Yeah, balance is a whole other beast, and we'll get to that in a future episode for sure, but we don't need to talk about it right now, because that is one hell of a rabbit hole to trip down. But we do have the mailbag coming up around the corner. Again, if you guys have questions for Shinmiri and I, please go ahead, reach out to us on Twitter, Reddit, Discord, Twitch, whatever it is. We'll be back with the mailbag right after this.
All right, welcome back to episode 4 of Flakemiri. We're going to take a look at the mailbag, see what you guys, what kind of questions are burning a hole in your pocket. First one up, take this one from Adams via Reddit. Is it better for the game if cards are pushed to be good in specific archetypes but bad in others? Or is it better to have cards that are more universally good, making predictability of decks lower upon seeing stuff like Leader?
This is a fascinating question. So I think what Adams is saying here is that is it better if cards are just like over the top good in one particular deck type or archetype, or is it better if there are more cards out there that are just kind of like these Swiss Army knives that can go in many different ones? And I guess if they're more universally available to other archetypes, if they fit into more different things, they kind of get less unique in that regard. It's one of those things where the more appealing you are to more people, the less individuality you have, the less personality you have. But I get the appeal of queuing into a leader ability and not knowing necessarily what's coming around the bend.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to like, would you rather have more type of good cards like Coral, Birna, and Fukusha that are kind of played in every Skellige deck or most Skellige decks, or would you have more like cards like Messenger of the Sea, which is specifically a rain deck, or Crow Clan Preacher, which is specifically an alchemy, or Herald, for example, which is specifically a warrior deck, right? Like these are all examples of good cards that have seen competitive play over the currently or in the past. And yeah, would you rather have cards that are good in specific archetypes, or if there were too many Birnas and too many Fukushas, then every Skellige deck would feel pretty samey. And so I think there shouldn't be too many of these type of cards that are really strong, but also archetype independent and can be played in every archetype. Because then, yeah, you just end up with like one deck that has all of these really good cards, and there's very few flex slots to actually define your deck's archetype and your deck strategy.
I think what we need to also realize is the fact that even if there were like a vast majority of the cards were these sort of do-it-all cards, these perfect fits into everything, that eventually it would still boil down to the fact that people would figure out that this is the best amount, or this is the best sort of recipe for this leader ability, so that when you do queue into that leader ability, it is going to be the same deck. It doesn't matter. People will eventually figure out that 80% of the deck should remain the same and 20% should change. Whereas right now, in reality, I think it's like, what, like out of 25 cards, 23 to 22 to 23 are usually just like, no, this is the jam you got to go with, and here are the flex slots that you can have. You have like one 10 provision flex slot, one like 6 to 7 provisions flex slot, and then maybe a pair of bronzes that you could sort of jam in and out, that based on flavor. But yeah, I'm of the ilk that you got to have certain things that just are really good for one archetype, because otherwise that archetype is probably going to flounder a little bit. If you didn't
There's
have
no reason. There's no reason to play that archetype if there aren't cards that are specifically good in that archetype.
Precisely. Right? Yeah. I don't need to say it anymore because that's basically the point. I mean, if you had Unseen Elder and it didn't do anything, like it's bleeding. It bleeds like crazy, which goes with the vampire thing. So it goes from there. There needs to be a balance. And honestly, I think that even if everything fit into everything else, the predictability of it in higher ranks is still going to wane because of the fact that people will figure out that there is, even if it's a 1% advantage to play the same thing, that 1% means a lot over the course of 100, 500,000 games in a season. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Adams, via Reddit. All right, here's one. We talked about artifacts earlier, Shinmiri. This one's from Pukas OG on Reddit. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do you think there should be a rework to all the bad artifacts that Gwent has at the moment? Most predominantly the Wyvern Shield and the Mastercrafted Spear. If so, how would you change them?
Well, I think in their current form, they're never going to see play.
No.
And so I think I personally, rather than, if you were going to change them, I wouldn't just want to buff them in terms of points or cooldown or like charges or provisions. I would like to rework them if you were to change them, and rework them a la locations where they do something on deploy and then have something on orders, but a smaller something on order. We talked about this before. I think when a value of an artifact gets too focused and too focused and all in on the order part, where it's like uninteractable except for heat wave, then I think you start creating potential issues and healthy problems.
I think that you're right on that. I mean, how would I change the Wyvern Shield or the Spear? You and I, Shimiri, existed through the worst of that particular card's existence, where it wasn't it a 4 provision card, like out of the box? Like it started off as a 4 provision card, I think. It was just like that.
5. I think it started off 5.
Yeah, either way, it was just that oppressive, and it was just that problematic. I mean, but you're right. It's never going to see play now. It has a 4-point ceiling off a 7-point body. Like it's the complete, opposite of what it is. It is the upside down of what that card should be. In terms of value translation at the very least, but still. How would we change it? I don't think they need to rework them necessarily. I think that it might just be good enough to just delete it and maybe exist with the fact that, hey, maybe down the line, if ever they create some sort of draft that makes sense, that might be something that you want to pick up out of a draft. Like every card game has what's called draft chaff, which is like just extra cards in there that is garbage.
I got it. Yeah. I got it. I've been inspired. All you got to do is take. I don't even know what these shield and spear do now. It's like what, 4 charges
and then charges, ping one cooldown, yeah,
or boost and 1 cooldown, right? So leave that exactly the same, but on deploy, the spear spawns a wolf pack, and the shield spawns a whatever the villager
peasant militia.
Peasant militia, yes. Spawn and play wolf pack and spawn and play peasant militia. I know it's not lore friendly with the spear or the shield, but you just add that as a deploy and you keep everything else the same. It probably sees some play. I don't know what is the provision of these cards. 6,
7.
There's 7 now.
Are they 7 or 6? Something like that.
I don't know. Ridiculous. 6 or 7. Like you end up getting an 8 for 6.
Dude, they need to be like 3. Yeah. Like these are the first 3 provision cards I would ever see in my life.
No. Make them 6 provisions. Spawn and play Wolfpack / Peasant Militia, depending on which one you have, and then keep the order the same. And I think that actually would be kind of interesting. You've got 8 for 6, but you have a little bit of flexibility, like being able to maybe using the shield to protect something by 1 point on the same turn that you play it. And you've got initiative on a lot of stuff now that it's not going to completely break things like Regis or Scorch, for example.
What's funny is that you actually, so the comparison I was going to make was to actually Wolfpack and Peasant Militia, where there's just bad cards. They exist, and they're going to exist, and they'll always exist. Something has to be the worst.
That's how you make both of these. It's 2 birds with 1 stone, Flake. You get both Wolfpack and Mastercrafted Spear to see play with this change.
I will say this. I mean, if you have 2 pieces of crap, if you squish them together, it doesn't make a diamond. So
maybe it does if you leave the provision cost the same.
Okay.
You don't double the provision.
All I'm saying is that as it exists now, it should be a 3 provision card. The only 3 provision card. That's my rework. Rework it. Don't change anything on it except the provision. The first ever 3 provision card. That's what I'm saying.
That would be busted.
It would be busted. 3 provision cards. All right. We don't need to go into that. That's a whole other. Those are so many different weeds.
We can add that topic to the future for future episodes.
I like it.
All right. Last question of the day. From Zayad Neo on Reddit. How do you nerf or rework Inspired Zeal to make at least 3 Northern Realms abilities viable? Like right now, we're only seeing Inspired Zeal, maybe a tiny little bit of pincer maneuver for these like degenerate decks, like the All-In Alumni, for example, just that really needs that turn 1 or round 1 consistency. But outside of those combo decks, which is pretty rare, vast majority, probably like 90-95% of Northern Realms decks that I face are all Inspired Zeal. What do you think?
Well, this is the tough part because I don't think that it's like it seems like it's such a jump to say if you nerf this, everything else becomes viable. But it's true. I mean, when something's as good as it is, it's really odd for you to go down the route to anything else. But Inspired Zeal does one thing that is so important for Gwent, which is it gives cards that need time to gestate and need time to give your opponent a chance to respond to them. It gives them that instant burst. Cards like Selkirk, cards like Rafard's Vengeance, these are cards that typically, for the most part, have very high power levels or very high ceilings in terms of what they can do, and it insta-activates them. So how do you rework it? I would not rework it because I think that it's something that this deck needs, it's something that Northern Realms needs. The one thing, again, minor tangent, people need to stop saying rework this. Not always the case. We could talk about that another time. But still, how do you change it? I would probably shave a charge off of it and maybe give it another provision or 2. As it stands right now, there are typically maybe 2 or there are 2 major pieces within Northern Realms that really wants that zeal right now. I think it's Rafard's Vengeance and Selkirk. Those need it to really get going. And that third one is so flex, and it can fit on a lot of different things. For instance, the mage that spawns off of Shani, let's say, or an alumni that doesn't get zeal or something like that. So it does have options for that third one. And that third one often factors in and becomes important. If you take away that third one, I think that you're forcing opponents to really start thinking of, okay, I only have 2 charges, and I know I want to give them to Selkirk and I want to give them to Refards, but what if my opponent puts me into a position where I need to use it on something else? It starts creating a little bit of uncertainty and a little bit of you're basically shaving away the flexibility of that leader ability as well, and that could actually have significant repercussions for that. So that's what I would say. I would say maybe a little rebalancing of the provisions that it gets, but take away a charge.
Interesting. You're going to give it the overwhelming hunger treat.
I am, because I'm still salty about that garbage, because I still think that hurts me.
Do you think I was going to? So I don't know if this is actually a good suggestion, but I was going to contemplate the idea of doing the opposite of what. Give it an extra charge, but nerf it to only boost by 1 instead of 2. Like, do you think that's a buff to the leader ability or a nerf?
I think that's certainly a buff.
You think it's a buff?
I do think it's a buff. I get it, because now you're no longer giving Selkirk 7 power.
Yeah.
I don't think the power is all that much of a big deal, in all honesty. I don't think that the power buff is that big of a deal, other than for Anseus and Selkirk.
So it's like you lose 2 points on the Anseus plus Selkirk, and then you also, your Refar's Vengeance is only a 6 instead of a 7, which is actually killable. Whereas 7 is like really difficult to kill. 6 dies to Horson Jr., Decoction, Trial of the Grasses, Parasite, blah, blah, blah. And maybe even like a 2 plus a 4. Or a leader charge, precision strike leader charge, and a rebuke. Like, maybe, because it's less protection, it's less dueling power, but you get more flexibility with your zeal. You can give more things zeal. I mean, that was just a thing, a thought, a random thought. I don't know if it ends up being a nerf or a buff, but I think it's interesting to contemplate. But I think my ideal solution to increase the variety of Northern Realms leader charges is to nerf Refar's Vengeance. Like, Refar's Vengeance existing in the game without a nerf in its current form is just so powerful that you have to play Inspired. If you don't play Inspired Zeal, your Refar's Vengeance is an Elder Bear. And you know what I mean by Elder, right? It's a 6 strength or 5 strength do-nothing card. Yeah. Because it just gets locked, answer, whatever, immediately, right? When you don't have Zeal. That's why, that's what you were saying about Inspired Zeal. It makes your Elder Bears no longer Elder Bears. So they should change the name. Don't rework the ability, rework the name. Change the name of Inspired Zeal to Unbearification. Because that's what it does. It changes the Elder Bears into non-Elder Bears. Same thing with like Selkirk. Selkirk could be a 5 for 9 if you play without Inspired Zeal, because it could get moved, it could get killed, it could get locked, all these things. I think Inspired...
Oh, I was going to say, what's so fascinating to me is that, a year ago, we may have had the conversation that the magic number is bringing something from 4 to 5, and now it's like 6 to 7. It's like, get them out of those safe zones. But you're right, because it does take 5 is the danger zone immediately. 6 is answerable, but it takes an important card, a gold card, typically. So that's actually, you kind of sold me on it. To a degree, because I'm also trying to think of what the automatic choices are for giving zeal to something. And outside of Selkirk, Anseus, and Refar's Vengeance, everything else I'm thinking about right out of the box is something like a bronze card, And I don't know how I feel about that.
So I think in terms of my ideal solution is nerf Refar's Vengeance, so it's no longer like a must play in the faction, and then that chain reaction will make Inspired Zeal not a must play, because the other Northern Realms leaders like Uprising, Shield Wall, Pincer Maneuver, Stockpile, they're not bad. They're not terrible leaders. They just don't let you play Refar's Vengeance and Selkirk to a degree. Selkirk also really important card because it's cheap. It removes pretty much everything that you care about removing. Like your opponent's unit has to be like a 12 or higher for you not to be able to Selkirk plus Inspired Zeal to kill something. man. So yeah, I think you make the inspired zeal the targets that really need zeal. If you make them not auto include in the faction, then the leader won't.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, I mean, both those are two options, but I don't think that's happening. I don't think they're gonna, like you said, give it the overwhelming hunger treatment, because that would people would be upset. But yeah, it is definitely on top of the Northern Realms menu right now, and rightfully so. And like you said, a lot of that is just the fact that even though Inspired Zeal might be kind of like the framework, the pièce de résistance in the middle of it is the fact that Rivard's Vengeance is just a really good card. Whew. Well, that's an episode, if I may say so. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Again, this is Flakemiri episode 4. If you want to get a question in for the mailbag, you can find a way. There's so many different ways, be it Twitter, Discord, Twitch, Reddit, love letter. I don't know how other ways to do it. But yeah, another good episode, Shinmiri. And like I said, I love you, man.
Love you too, Flake. This was really fun. I really enjoyed this one. And yeah, I love you guys out there listening or watching. Make sure you tune back in next week for episode 5 of The Reddit Strikes Back.
I like it. All right, boys and girls, thanks again for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the Gwentfinity YouTube channel. Subscribe to all that stuff. Give us a good review. This is how we get sponsors that we beg for at the beginning of the show. Be good, ladies and gentlemen. And again, don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning, so keep playing cards you might win. Catch you next time.